Today's Mind Your Own Business is brought to you by Audible, where you can get the free audiobook of your choice by signing up for a no-cost 30-day membership at audibletrial.com/MYOB. That's audibletrial.com/MYOB. This is Mind Your Own Business with Mike and Matt, Race Car Radio's podcast for business owners, entrepreneurs, and aspiring entrepreneurs. I'm David Hoffman, and your voices of reason are Mike Gansel and Matt Plosiak. Today, Lori Jacobson of Jaybird Communications joins us to talk about hiring and why the internet may have made it harder than ever to find the right staff. All right. Well, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning, David.
Today, we have the fabulous Lori Jacobson of Jaybird Communications, which is a boutique PR firm specializing mostly in the music industry, some other things as well. Maybe, Lori, tell us a little bit about your business and what you guys do.
Yes, Jaybird Communications is a PR agency, communications agency, that focuses on the business side of the music industry, meaning we don't represent artists, we represent companies that work in the space, and primarily on the business-to-business part rather than business-to-consumer. And it is very specialized, but yet we've managed to survive 9 years with growth. We have great clients, all different kinds, sizes. The Association of Independent Music Publishers is a client, Bandzoogle, Exactuals, so probably not household names to all your listeners, but very important within the infrastructure of the music industry.
And so recently you've been going through a hiring process, which has had some ups and downs. And I think that's what we're in here to talk about today. Maybe you could take it from there. Tell us what you've been going through and maybe what your question is about that.
Sure. So I ran Jaybird for the first 2 years all on my own. And then I hired my first employee 7 years ago, my second employee 6 years ago, and I haven't had a real need to hire since then. One of those staff decided that he was tired of New York and headed off to the West Coast. So I had to replace staff for the first time. And I have found that it's a very different world out there for hiring, particularly on I'll say a more junior level than it was when I did it 6 years ago.
So what was your biggest issue? Or I'm sure they had many issues, but what was one of the bigger ones?
Well, what's the difference you're talking about between them?
Well, the difference back then, it was I put 2 ads on 2 very specialized music blogs that still exist, and got a small number of qualified, interested applicants. This time, one of those blogs wasn't taking ads anymore. The other, I got no answers to there were only a few ads on the blog. So I went to LinkedIn and I went to another kind of larger PR hiring thing, and it was a disaster. I got, perhaps close to 100 responses, but firstly, almost none of them read the actual job description. So I got people who were wildly unqualified in all kinds of different levels. That was the most, I would say, the egregious thing of people not reading it, not going to my website to see what the company, if they weren't unclear what the company does, not really putting any thought into even the kind of the LinkedIn response or a cover letter response. But it was just a very shocking experience of very, very, very basic
Well,
things
when you
to
went
me.
through this process 6 and 7 years ago, was the process that different?
The applicant pool ended up being different, but the process itself is pretty much the same.
Well, I've done the same thing. I've been hiring people for a client of mine, and I actually have very similar experiences. I've been working with ZipRecruiter, and have the job description is very clear, and I have probably sifted through about 100 plus, and what amazes me is they're not reading the job description. they're not anywhere in the same field as what this is all about.
I've got for one of my clients, we were hiring some people few months ago. The job description on the website says, minimum 2 years experience, and 75% of the other respondents are just graduating, and the jobs are filled. We still keep getting dozens of resumes a week.
And a lot of the resume, you say, well, what sorts of people, bad people are like, I can do anything.
Well,
and that was, and one woman, it was fantastic. It was one of the LinkedIn. Her LinkedIn explanation was everything from jewelry maker. It was unbelievable. I mean, the list of things that she could do.
Yes, but you realize I've often thought about, why did this person apply for this job? And part of it is that the person who's applying for the job, it's a dream. They have a dream. And somehow this ad, for however strange it may seem to us as to why they would, this ad that we've put in is an answer to their dream. Somehow, some way. And then it's because they want to be, on some levels, they want to be recognized. I want this, I want to do this, I want this job. And this description kind of floats on the computer, click, and they...
I'm wondering if part of this is because it's so easy to... It's not like, you have to fill out an application, type up something, mail it. You just copy and paste. So why not just apply to everything? Is that people's attitude now?
I think that's actually
that seems
probably...
to be happening.
The other part that I found kind of fascinating is after people who had applied, and some of them who were actually qualified, just didn't answer. I would respond to them through LinkedIn, and I would get no response. And I would give it a couple of days, and then email them outside of LinkedIn just in case the app wasn't working, and still no response. It was shocking to me.
Yeah, I had that same experience. I had interviewed somebody for a position. It would have been an inside sales position. And I told her what the process was. I said, look, I'd like you to do a review of the website, come back to me, show me what your critical thinking is like. Doesn't have to be a lot. And she was wonderful on the phone. We had a great conversation. We communicated email, she said, and then she disappeared. I never heard back from her. I tried again,
I had a similar experience less than a year ago, where I actually was set to hire an intern, somebody I met who came up to me and said, I need an internship. I want to work for a company like yours. Can I be your intern this summer? I said, sure, that'd be great. We made an appointment to get together, and he blew me off.
You mean he never responded?
Well, we had an initial interview. I hired the guy, and then he basically didn't show up for work.
Did you ever find out why?
No. He stopped responding to my emails.
From what I find out, this is not uncommon.
Well, I'm wondering, is there a generational thing, or for people coming out of school now that they're just...
I think it's somewhat generational.
I have heard, that is part of, in frustration when I posted some things about this on Facebook. That's what I ended up hearing from my peers, like this is a thing right now. But the other thing, I actually think it's some of it is the dating apps and the other apps of kind of the, swipe right, swipe left. Because you hear it's the same behavior as dating. And it makes me also think a little bit of your statement about the dream. There are so many people who won't actually reach for the dream, or they're able to make that first step and then they freak out and they back off. And it makes me think of kind of early in my career, very early, I was still looking for internships, and people are like, how did you get that internship? I asked. There was an ad in the paper and I answered it. And this was when I was interning at a radio station or a local music magazine, and I think it seemed unattainable to people. But those moments where somebody is kind of reaching for the dream, it's that kind of, do you really want the dream or not?
Maybe, like you said, they reach for the dream. It's easy, that first step, and then life gets in the way. And people are embarrassed, so the actions speak for their words.
Embarrassed about what?
Embarrassed to say to you that I made a mistake. Maybe we're not the right fit.
I got another opportunity.
I have another opportunity.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that is say a general comment. I think people don't know how to gracefully say no.
Correct.
And do that. But I will say in one of my process when I had somebody not show up for a phone call, I did again, like when you say keep your culture forward, I'm like, all right, people first, maybe to quote Susie Orman, check in, see if she is okay. And that's the first question. She's still not going to get this job necessarily, but as a human being, is this person okay? But at the same time, and that's the nice side of my personality. I'll say the flip side of my personality, and this was back, this is not the recent episode. This was one of my previous hiring episodes. I had someone cancel an in-person interview 5 minutes before with the excuse that their eyes were puffy and they couldn't make it to the interview. And I will say my comment on that was kind of like, I did not say this. I did not say this to the person, but it's like, the only reason to be emailing me 5 minutes before the interview to say is that you got hit by a car crossing the street, across to the office. And based on where this person lived, it's like they would have had to have left their house 45 minutes. Like there's clearly they just overslept. Or something, or you're sick, fine, but just say I'm really sick. You would have known you were sick
before 5 minutes before.
Yeah, well, look, we do have certain standards, and it doesn't necessarily include puffy eyes. But
fortunately, I was able to find ultimately 2 hires, partly by adjusting my experience requirement, and that the hire that I did for the full-time position happens to be somebody who is straight out of college. However, this person has a degree in the music industry, and I happen to be a mentor in their class on entrepreneurship. So I got to actually interact with this person, and they had volunteered to work at an event that I had in June. So I felt more comfortable putting, an entry-level person in this position. And then the other person, and one of my applicants who was actually kind of right off the bat, I had posted on a Friday, I got the email on a Saturday, she was ready to go, clearly had a lot of PR skills, and it went and asked me great questions, but I felt like she would need more polish and she didn't have the industry expertise. And I felt like, I was looking for an intern, and I was going to actually go back to one of the schools that I've spoken at and solicit there. And I said, let me see if she'd be willing to be an intern, because I'd love to give her an opportunity and see how her skills could be developed. And so that was the one person through from LinkedIn that I ultimately ended up offering something to, but it was not the full-time position I had in mind.
So actually, one of the experiences that we all have in hiring people is we have to change our expectations, basically, or change the job, or change the qualifications, or really look inside ourselves and say, what do I really want? And that's really part of the challenge of that process. It's not a one-way street, and it takes a lot of time.
Right. So, Lori, it sounded like that the full-time hire that you just made was through a personal connection.
Yes. From
the school you were giving lectures at.
Yeah, it was an unexpected byproduct of mentoring this year. Right. That I hadn't really thought of putting myself forward as a mentor as building a pipeline, but of course it was. And certainly is something I'll be more deliberate now going forward.
So, I guess one of the guidelines I like to tell our clients is, one, you should always be looking for people. Not because when you start looking, when you need someone, it's too late because it takes time. And except for a recent grad, all the good people have jobs. So they're in a job already, generally. And our best hires for the computer company Michael and I had, one guy took me 4 years to hire, and one took me 5 years to hire. So I don't think it's, you just do it, stop. It's, you're meeting people all the time. You're networking with people all the time. and always want to be on the lookout for someone that might be able to fill a role.
We'll be right back after these short messages.
If you're enjoying this show, you might also like some of the other podcasts on Race Car Radio. For instance, try London's New York. Tour guide, historian, and socialist agitator Dan London takes you on a deep and opinionated trip through some parts of New York City that are a little to the side of the usual tourist trail, and through the extraordinary, rich, and divisive history of one of the greatest cities in the world. I guarantee you it's a view of New York City that you've never heard before. Listen and subscribe now to London's New York at racecarradio.com.
Hey, it's David, and I'm talking to you from Race Car Radio World Headquarters, where we're very excited that Mind Your Own Business with Mike and Matt is now sponsored by Audible, the world's biggest and best provider of audiobooks. And you, our listeners, can get a free audiobook of your choice, any one of their unmatched selection of titles. All you have to do is sign up for your free 30-day membership at www.audibletrial.com/MYOB. And here's Mike on the recommendation line with a book you might want to try. Hey, Mike, is that you?
It is. Hi, David.
So, what's the audiobook you want to recommend?
Well, today I was thinking about You Can't Teach a Kid to Ride a Bike at a Seminar by David Mattson and David Sandler. You know, I'm a Sandler sales disciple, and this is really the keystone book about Sandler sales and how to really become a very effective salesperson. It teaches you attitude, techniques, and behaviors. I think it's one of the best books I've ever read on sales.
So, that was You Can't Teach a Kid to Ride a Bike at a Seminar by David Mattson and David H. Sandler. Just one of the incredible selection of audiobooks about business that you could choose by going to audibletrial.com/MYOB today. That's MYOB for Mind Your Own Business. And signing up for your free 30-day membership. Again, audibletrial.com/MYOB. And now back to Mind Your Own Business with Mike and Matt and our guest, Lori Jacobson of Jaybird Communications. What does one do in this environment? Is there a better way to hire people?
There is another way, and I've been working with a staffing agency, and their job is to go through the chaff. So, I've given them the job description. Now, they go to the same places that I would go to. They'll go to ZipRecruiter, they'll go to Indeed, but for their fee, they're going to take the time to basically present me with a much smaller list of candidates who are going to fit my requirements. Now, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to interview that person on the phone, and then if I think that they're qualified enough in my eyes to meet with my client, then I'll do that. But actually, I have found this to be successful. Now, not every, we have this concept about brokers, right? So we think of a staffing agency as a broker, and they'll just give you anything. Well, obviously, there are many people who do that. But if you find the right one and you negotiate something that you think is fair for their time and your time, then that is an alternative. And that has been working for me. I have probably hired 3 or 4 people for different clients recently through using that system. I still do the going through the ZipRecruiter and LinkedIn, but they've done a pretty good job. So that's an alternative.
But I would be curious to know, for a company of my size, my hiring history, the level at which I'm hiring, which is, hopefully 1 employee every couple of years, 2 employees every couple of years, at a salary which is not a 6-figure salary, where I know a lot of these folks work off of, on a commission basis. I do have to say, I wonder if it's just not of value to a broker to work with a company as small as mine.
Depends on the size of the company you're working with. The company that I've been working with is just two guys, and they may grow at one point, and I might not be a good client for them at some point in the future. But until then, I think I'm a very good client. And so I would say to you, look, if you find the right outsource agency to work with, okay, and you pay 20%, for argument's sake, 15 to 20%, which is what they typically charge, and you save several months and you get the hire that you want sooner than later, then, money is time, time is money. It's to your advantage. So, and again, it's not for everyone, but I think it's worth exploring.
One of the reasons I've always been nervous about, the two reasons I've always been nervous about that idea. And one of them is, this idea of creating the perfect candidate in your mind. One is you might not actually know who the perfect candidate is until you meet them. And when you give somebody, even if it's, I've talked to people who've had this problem. They work at a big company and they need to hire an assistant or something. So they have to go through their HR department and they'll hand them a job description. And it's, they look for someone who checks off blang, 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 blang. But the right person may be somebody who only has two of those, but has this X factor that they didn't think to put in the. And so how do you?
It's true.
And often the best person is like, wow, I never would have thought. It's like dating. You meet somebody and they don't check off any of your boxes, but you just really like them for some reason.
And it's an interesting process when you're starting out and you're hiring people who you're going to be working very closely with. I mean, we share a co-working space. We basically sit on top of each other all day long. And a lot of my training in hiring had been at larger companies. And you're told you need to hire for different personality types and things that complement you and all this other. And actually, in one of my previous hiring experiences with Jaybird, I was weighing two candidates who they really felt very equal to me. One had a tremendously outgoing, buoyant personality, and the other was much quieter. And when I had done his background checks, it was actually been, was told by somebody like, don't be thrown by this. And I was very torn because I felt like, while I am an outgoing person, I felt like maybe this is really what we need in this role. And I really turned around and I went to my husband and my best friend and I said, if you were me, I think these two are, which would you hire? And they both like, you'll kill the outgoing guy. Like that will just rub you so wrong. It was one of those, like in my brain, I thought the ideal candidate should be like this. It should be super bubbly and outgoing. And then kind of having this reality check from the people who know me best and have spent the most time with me.
Well, culture is a very important part of an organization, no matter how big, no matter how small. And that really is a factor. So, when you're thinking about hiring someone, you think of that culture that you want to create. What are your ultimate goals? What is your mission?
How do you square that with the idea of outsourcing this initial plunge through the pile of detritus?
I don't know if I can quite answer your question. You just have to you have to do things both using your brain and using your heart. You've got to marry both your instinct, your gut, and discipline. Are you doing the right things? That's why actually, look, if you can tell an outsourced person the type of person you're looking for, and if they're smart enough, they're going to give you people that fit, but they're also going to give you outliers. And you could tell them, listen, if you find an outlier that you think has some possibilities, I want to talk to that outlier. So you don't have to be rigid. And if you have that profile that I talked about earlier, you can take a serious look at the outliers and say, so you obviously your close advisors said, this isn't going to work for you. So in essence, you were going outside. You were going back to an outlier, not that person that you had said, this is what I want. Now, I have been very successful of late using assessment surveys that I work with a client, and we basically set up a profile of what we're looking for. Now, you can go positive and negative on that because, there are things like, I want to think about independence, accommodation, manageability, all of those types of social behaviors. And then I also want to think of thinking ability, numeric reasoning, objective thinking. So I think that actually is really a beneficial. It has worked quite well. It's just another tool set in trying to assess who the right employee is for you.
Yeah,
Have you done that?
I've done something like that. I mean, I really thought about, well, what do I hear from the clients that I work with, about why they hire Jaybird. And it's because we know the music industry better than anyone else. And so I decided, ultimately, it is very hard to teach someone the history of the music industry. They have to love it. You have to come in and that is a passion for you. And so it's like, I can't teach somebody that, but I can teach somebody with good writing skills how to direct that and turn that into a press release, a tweet, a blog.
Well, that's an interesting perspective. The way I think of it is, and I think this is what you're saying, the question is whether it's a job or whether it's a career. And so, I often ask, what other jobs are you looking for? What's the kind of career that you really want to build? And just like you say, you can't teach passion. You have to identify it. And often enough, even in office furniture, if the individual doesn't have a passion for design, for architecture, for the way things look, for fabric, textiles, or whatever, I want to see that passion.
Well, everything's interesting if you're interested in it, right? I mean, everything you can. There's no career path that doesn't have interesting details.
That's true, but there are people who
But you have to be
basically
interested in it.
Exactly, you have to be interested in it. That's exactly it.
And it just has to be more than just a job, more than just a paycheck. I think that.
Well, and it's, there are different mindsets. Way back, very early in my career, I had an intern, and at the time I was working at one of the top artist agencies in the music industry. And we had an intern, and she said, well, I'm leaving because I got a job to work with, I think it was Birdseye. And I was like, because I just love PR. And it sort of blew my mind because I love music and musicians. I am good at the craft of PR. Theoretically, I could do PR for Frozen Peas. I would not really have
I was
passion
wondering about that.
for doing PR for Frozen Peas.
Okay. So, Lori, we've been knocking this around for a while, and it's a fascinating conversation. I've been enjoying it. I know that all of us have. I hope you have too. What's your lesson learned? One lesson, two lessons? What has this process taught you?
Definitely to work the pipeline in a different way. I really had not thought of some of the mentoring and the speaking at the schools as actually kind of a two-way street, that I was building a network, and yet I am. So I want to be even more deliberate about that going forward.
If you needed to hire somebody tomorrow, you need to put up, what would you do to get that process going? Matt, what would you do?
I think first I would send out emails to my contacts, and depending on what the job was, I may actually even call several people that I know and see if they know of anyone. Also, vendors can be a good source of referrals as well. So that's where I would start.
Well, I'd write the job description, do the ideal candidate, do a profile, call everybody in my network that I thought would be relevant to speak to, and ask them as much probing questions as I could to see if they knew of anyone or if I was sort of in the right direction. I'd ask them to help set my expectations. And then I would actually reach out to some executive staffing folks that I know, and having collected the information that I just talked about, basically looking for them. Typically, these are folks that work on not consignment, contingency, and so they'd be happy to take what I've got and hear, and they'd be honest to tell me there's something they could help with or not, or refer me to someone else in their industry that could. That's the way I would do it.
I think really the big lesson for me in all of this is Mike, that you really should mind your own business.
Well, I think Lori's doing a very good job of minding her own business. Matt, I'm not so sure that you're minding your own business.
I'd like to mind everyone's business. Thank you all.
Thanks for listening to Mind Your Own Business with Mike and Matt. The stars of the show are Mike Ganzel and Matt Plosiak of Voice of Reason Consulting, www.voiceofreasonconsulting.com. Today's guest was Lori Jacobson of Jaybird Communications, www.jaybirdcom.com. I'm David Hoffman, and I produced the show. It was recorded and mixed by Austin Colon. Very special thanks to Valiant Technology for hosting us for today's recording session. You can find them at thevaliantway.com. New episodes coming soon include conversations on everything from what to do when you find yourself in competition with an algorithm to what to do when you find yourself in China. Never miss an episode by subscribing to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, and many of your other favorite podcasting apps. Find those links at racecarradio.com/mindyourownbusiness. You can also follow us on social media and interact with the show there at MYOB Podcast on Facebook and Twitter. Mind Your Own Business with Mike and Matt is a production of Racecar Radio, www.racecarradio.com. Racecar Radio is a division of Citizen Racecar. We tell stories.